The chamber quivered with the echo of chanting voices. Smoke of burning resin curled thickly in the air, clinging to the damp limestone walls and stinging the eyes. Torches flared against the painted figures of gods, their shadows leaping grotesquely, as if the gods themselves recoiled from what was about to unfold. At the centre lay the women, stripped of their names and adorned only with bands of linen. They were not guests of the temple but offerings, pressed into silence beneath the weight of ritual. Bronze anklets clinked as they were driven forward, each step measured, each glance downward, as the priest's staffs struck stone in time with the chant. The overseer, veiled in leopard skin, lifted his hand, and the noise broke into a deep silence. Only the hiss of resin on flame remained. His eyes swept over the figures kneeling in a line, searching, weighing, choosing. A single gesture decided which among them would be claimed by the gods, and which by the men who spoke in their name. The air pressed heavy, sweet with incense yet sharp with the tang of fear. Beneath the mask of ritual, what unfolded was no act of divine devotion, but of domination. The temple was both stage and prison, where women became instruments in rites proclaimed as sacred. The drums struck, slow and unyielding. The chosen were led beyond the torchlight, into the chamber where the stone floor grew slick, where cries were muffled beneath chants that rose louder to conceal them. The gods were invoked, yet it was men who fed upon power, cloaking cruelty in sanctity. The Nile moved with its eternal rhythm, a breath across the heart of Egypt. Along its banks palaces gleamed in the sun, their walls painted with images of eternal order. The scent of lotus and fresh-cut papyrus lingered in courtyards where fountains whispered, while corridors echoed with the shuffle of sandals and the soft jingle of golden jewelry. Within these halls, the rulers of Egypt preserved the illusion of harmony, that the world was held in balance by their hand and blessed by the gods. The palace was not only a place of governance but a theatre of ritual. Daily presence in sacred processions and ceremonies projected purity and order. But the quiet hours revealed lives governed by a relentless hierarchy. In the temples, columns rose like forests of stone, painted with lotus and palm. Priests in white linen tended altars, their chants weaving order into sound. To outsiders, this order seemed unbreakable. Offerings of bread, beer, and flowers lay neatly arranged before the gods, while musicians played harps and flutes to soothe divine ears. Yet it was within these sanctuaries that the most guarded traditions lay hidden. Women were both celebrants and sacrifices to the image of cosmic stability, bound into rituals that claimed to honor gods, but often served human desire. Within the royal world, secrecy itself was a language. Scrolls of papyrus preserved in hidden chambers detailed not only prayers and hymns, but instructions for rites that blurred the sacred with the profane. The public saw only fragments, the grand festivals, the gilded barges on the Nile, the statues drawn through the streets. The private world, by contrast, was known to few and spoken of by none. Those who served within it carried knowledge marked by silence, enforced by fear, and wrapped in oaths to gods and kings. At the heart of this world stood the Pharaoh, the axis between the human and divine. His presence shaped everything, yet he was not alone. High priests, scribes, and stewards formed an invisible lattice of power around him, a lattice into which women were often woven, willingly or not. To the world outside, they were ornaments of the court. To those within, they were instruments of ritual, at times elevated, at times enslaved. The palaces and temples shimmered with eternal order, but beneath the carved facades and painted reliefs lay chambers where the order faltered. A silent tension lingered, like the shadow of a storm not yet arrived. Those who walked these halls with bowed heads, carrying trays of incense or pitchers of wine, knew it was appropriation, cloaked in incense and chant. The women's silence was part of the rite. They were not to speak, only to be spoken through. Inscriptions carved on hidden walls detailed rites where women were declared vessels of Hathor or Isis, their bodies treated as channels for divine blessing. The priests proclaimed that through such contact, fertility would be assured for the Nile and prosperity for the land. Yet beneath those words, the reality lay bare. Women reduced to instruments, their sanctity stripped under the name of sanctity itself. It was a betrayal carefully veiled in holiness. The temple's sanctum, with its polished stone floors and painted reliefs of goddesses, gave the illusion of reverence. The truth revealed itself only in the details. The trembling of a hand as linen cords were tied, the forced stillness of eyes cast downward, the scrape of bronze doors closing behind them. Those who enacted the rites were not gods, though they wrapped themselves in divine authority. They were men, wielding ritual as a mask for possession. Whispers spoke of entire chambers reserved for these practices, chambers where light seldom reached. The cries of women, muffled by chants, dissolved into the rhythm of drums that declared the gods had been fed. Few dared to name what truly occurred, for to name it would be to break the fragile facade upon which Egypt's divine order rested. The betrayal was not merely of the women, but of the very gods invoked to justify the act. Within these rituals, secrecy was survival. Those who served the temple carried what they witnessed like a second skin. Averted eyes became a shield, silence a form of loyalty. Yet the memory of each act lingered, etched not on papyrus, but in flesh and blood. The women were released back into the palace world, bearing the outward titles of honor, priestess, handmaiden, wife of the god, while carrying within them the weight of a violation spoken of by none. What was presented as devotion was, in truth, enslavement. What was declared sacred was, in truth, profane. The women who had passed through the hidden rites walked among the crowds as living contradictions, praised as holy, burdened with silence. Their movements betrayed traces of what they carried, the stiffness of posture, the lowered gaze, the quiet retreat from song and laughter. Egypt's divine order demanded perfection. When blemishes surfaced, they were concealed with greater display. More incense, more offerings, more grand processions filled the streets of Thebes and Memphis. Yet each public act of sanctity seemed to echo against a hollowness growing within the sanctuaries. The gods were said to require these rituals, but if the gods were listening, they answered with silence. The Nile itself bore witness. In seasons when its floodwaters faltered, when grain withered and hunger spread, murmurs rose that the gods had turned away. The priests tightened their grip, insisting the rites must be performed with greater fervour, yet each repetition deepened the stain. What was meant to secure order instead drew unease, a sense that Egypt's balance, ma'at, had been disturbed, not upheld. The women bore the heaviest weight of aftermath. Some carried new life, children born into households that whispered questions of lineage. Others were left behind in silence, their futures dimmed, their bodies marked by what was proclaimed sacred, but felt as violation. Their presence became a living reminder of contradiction, and the court grew restless around them. Nobles who once bowed reverently began to harbour private doubts. Trust in the sanctity of ritual eroded, though few dared to speak it aloud. Stone walls kept secrets well, yet even stone cannot seal what festers. The very inscriptions on temple walls began to carry double meaning. Hymns that spoke of divine union seemed to conceal the echo of human sin. In the streets, stories twisted into legend, shaping fear into warning, that those who misused the god's name would themselves fall under curse. The collapse was not sudden, but gradual, like the crumbling of sandstone in desert winds. Faith in ritual eroded, and with it, the aura of invincibility that surrounded the throne. Silence heavier than the hymns that once filled the air. The records that remain are fragments. Prayers inscribed in hieroglyphs, hymns to Hathor and Isis, invocations to fertility and rebirth. Nowhere do they confess the truth of what occurred within those hidden chambers. The scrolls speak of blessing, but the eyes of stone statues seem to know otherwise. Were these rites sanctified by belief, or profaned by power cloaked in holiness? The past refuses to answer. What is certain is this: women who were named sacred were bound into silence. Their footsteps echo through time, though history remembers them not by name, but as shadows cast upon the walls of ritual. Each torch that flickered in the temple halls lit both sanctity and cruelty, inseparable, inseverable. The unanswered question lingers like the smoke of burnt resin. Were these acts offerings to gods, or offerings to the hunger of men who dared to speak in the god's name? No inscription declares it, no record admits it, and so the silence remains, as enduring as the stones of Egypt themselves.